Welcome to our game today. We're looking at a game from 2012 between Magnus Carlsen and Vishy Anand. And in this game, we'll see why capturing a piece with the right pawn can make a massive difference to whether you win or you lose the game, or whether you don't even capture. So let's have a look at the game. In the game in 2012, this was the Bilbao Grand Slam, and it was in round 9. Carlsen went on to win this with a tournament with a very nice score indeed. In the game, we get e4, c5, knight f3, d6, bishop b5 check, d7, bishop takes, queen takes, c4, knight f6, knight c3, g6, d4, and then we get knight to d4, and after g7 and f3, we get this kind of Maroczy bind type position where white is controlling all of the light squares in the middle of the board. Black's got control on these two dark squares, and it's going to become a battle to try and gain central control in the game. Continues with queen to c7, b3 protecting the pawn, then a5 and bishop to b2. Computer thinks it's better to x-ray the queen by going to c to d2, but obviously Carlsen wanted to get control along this diagonal for later in the game. So we get knight c6, we get castles by Carlsen, castles by Anand, and then knight c to e2. And one of the reasons for that is because if you played something like knight to d5 after you play queen to c5, we're already putting ourselves under pressure here in the game, because this bishop is not protected. We've got 3 attackers, 2 defenders. So to avoid any shenanigans, we get knight to c2, then we get rook to d8, bishop to c3 attacking the queen, bishop to b6, and after we get king to h1, d5, and knight takes c6. Now this is a very interesting position, because let's just say if you took with the c pawn instead, well, you're opening yourself to a very unfavorable combination as white, because after you can sack your knight to gain the bishop, or sack the knight to gain the pawn, and after captures, rook captures, and because of the pin on the queen, you're now in a very tricky situation. So you can get out of this position by playing something like queen to e1, and after knight d4, knight to d4, bishop takes, queen takes the pawn to even up, but after playing rook to d7, queen to e2, and rook to d8, we see that black really, you can say, has got a slight advantage here in the in-game equal pawns. It looks very drawish, but black definitely has a slight advantage because their rooks are combined with the queen, and yes, so black would very happily take this position, but Carlsen of course doesn't want to see this, so he plays knight to c6, taking here, and after pawn takes, we get queen to e1 with a sneaky little plan of x-raying the rook here. So we get d8, and now we get e5 by Carlsen, and after e5 we get knight to e8, and Carlsen then plays e6, which the computer says is a mistake. But here is our critical moment in the game. What would you play here? Because this is a move that Anand would go on to regret later in the game, and Carlsen would take advantage of. Now, the best move, according to the computer, is simply to go f5, or f6 rather, and having this pawn here, and maybe with plans of, attacking it later on in the game and winning it. Now, you can imagine why maybe Anand didn't want this, because after these get traded on, if you get a rook up here, you've now got a nice little outpost here. However, in the game, Anand takes. Now, Anand takes and we get double pawns. Now, double pawns sometimes get a bad name, but we're going to see in this game how the double pawns really did work out to be a bad situation for him. So we get knight to e4, and after the trade-off of the bishops, we get d4. Very nice by Anand, and queen to d2. We get c5, and you might think, okay, let's get the queen here and e1, e2. Let's go attacking this pawn, and Carlsen decides to do a little bit different. He pushes rook to e1, and we get g7, and that's protecting the pawn. So we might think, well, this game is all going to be about trying to win this game, maybe doubling the rooks, then with Anand bringing his rooks down and trying to protect these pawns as the game goes into the end game. However, Carlsen has a very sneaky move here, and it is g4. And g4 is a good move. In fact, it's the best move in the position because first of all, it blocks any advantages by black's knight. But we also see that Carlsen has a cunning little plan, because after rook to c6, Anand is still, of course, thinking that Carlsen is just going to start attacking this double pawn. But because it is such a glaring weakness, it means that Carlsen can now start opening up some other attacks, and he goes knight to h3. Now knight to h3 is a mistake here, but it's only a mistake if you find the correct moves, and unfortunately Anand doesn't find the right moves, because here very simply Magnus has a very simple attacking ID. Let's get his queen to h6, his knight, put it onto g5, and you're threatening mate, because of the fact that this square will be covered, and because there's double pawns, it means that Anand will have to waste two moves to be able to get him to have an escape square here on e7. So do we see what a mistake this turns out to be? Well, it wasn't such a mistake when he done it, but Carlsen took advantage of it, and ultimately that is what good chess is taking advantage of the mistakes or slight errors that your opponent has made. So here Anand realizes I'm in big trouble, so he goes knight to e8, trying to cover, because his whole idea is now, well, of course, if I can get to f6, I can cover this square. So Carlsen plays h6, then we get knight to f6, knight to g5, attacking this pawn, setting up the mating possibilities here. And here Anand plays d3. I was thinking, what can I do? He's kind of stuck, so he plays d3, hoping to get a little bit of counterattack. And here we get rook to e5. Now, there's a whole load of positions here if we didn't, so we get d3, but let's say in the game Anand played something like a6. Let's see how things could have played out. Carlsen could have played e5, and if he took something like the pawn here, the game is over. Because can you see the really beautiful move that Carlsen could have done? And this is just to highlight what a beautiful position this is. Doesn't look like anything, but he could have given up his knight, sacked it for the h7 pawn, and if it was taken back, well then it was all over Red Rover, as we say. Uh, Go to f8, you win it back, and you're now threatening to win the rook here. So you have to a whole load of issues going on, and a very nice position indeed. You win the other rook, and well, this game is all over. And in the game we get d3, and what if you went with something like rook f8 instead of d3? Well, here again we get the e5. Again, this weakness is just so overbearing that Anand is pretty much tied down to it. If you play d3 here, again you have the same combination of moves where you got mate in two. You have to give up the rook, and there's nothing that you can do here to stop the mate either. So we see really beautiful stuff by Carlsen. So in the game we get e5 after d3 was played. We then get king to h8. This is actually stopping the mate here, because you can now play this move of, no, you can't play that move. In fact, you can play rook to g8 rather. So all you can do is to try and pick up this pawn. So after d1, we have the really nice, so we get e5, h5, h8, d1, and then if we play that, we saw we can't be one, but in the game we get h6, because you think, well, maybe I can protect this pawn, but no, you can't, because you've got a beautiful fork. So there's really nothing you can do here. In the game, Anand decided to go to a6, and after this pawn was picked up, well, the game is pretty much all over here. Um, it's just too much of a crushing attack for Anand. to deal with, and so he resigned. So we see a really beautiful example of how taking advantage of a small error by your opponent can really move to massive attacks later in the game.